Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is Technique Tuesday. So I want to conduct a little experiment today. I'm going to demonstrate two different methods of binding off that are typically recommended to knitters who are looking for a stretchy bind off edge for their projects. After I do the demonstration, we'll compare the results, but we'll also compare the results to other methods of binding off to see if there are specific situations where these really stretchy bind offs would be super helpful, or are there situations when maybe that might not be the choice that we want to make for our project. So we're going to be looking not just at functionality, how well do they actually stretch, but also the aesthetics and any advantages or disadvantages that these techniques might have, so that we can think about for a specific project what combination of aesthetics, functionality, and execution do we want to look at before we get started on our project. This bind off can be done in a couple of different ways, and it produces exactly the same result. I'm going to be demonstrating at first with the yarn in my left hand. And I will show you the two different ways it can be done when the yarn is in your left hand, and then I will show you how you do it if the yarn is in your right hand. You're going to work the first two stitches like you would for any standard chain bind off. In this case, I've got knit 2, purl 2 ribbing, so I'm going to knit the first two stitches. And then I'm going to bind off one stitch. Every time I bind off a stitch, I'm going to do a yarn over, and then I'm going to pass that bound off stitch over the yarn over. Then I'm going to work the next stitch. So now we've got a purl. So I'm going to purl that stitch. I'm going to bind it off. Then I'm going to do a yarn over and bind that off. And now I'm going to do a purl stitch, bind it off, do a yarn over, bind it off. What you can do instead, and will give you exactly the same result, is you work a stitch, bind it off, and then insert your left needle back through the front of the other one. And now you're going to wrap your yarn, which looks exactly like a yarn over, and you're pulling it through there. So you're doing exactly the same thing. You're just doing it through a different process. Bind off. As soon as you bind off, you insert your left needle through the front, wrap the yarn, and pull it through again. So what you are doing is you're creating an extra stitch between each of the original stitches, and that's going to give you a bind off edge that's much longer. Now if you hold the yarn in your right hand, you're going to do the same thing. So the next stitch is a purl stitch. You have to move the yarn to the front. You purl the stitch. You pull that one over. You do a yarn over again. You pull that one over. You work the next one. Bind it off, do a yarn over, bind it off. Or you could instead, now we're on a knit stitch, we bind it off, we stick the needle back through the front of there, wrap the yarn, and knit it a second time. Knit the next one, pass it over, insert your left needle through the front, wrap the yarn again, and bind it off. With this one, we're going to work the first stitch. However it presents, we've got knit 2, purl 2 ribbing again, so I'm going to knit this stitch. From now on, before I work any stitch, I will do a yarn over. If I am doing a knit stitch, I will be doing a reverse yarn over so that the yarn is coming over the needle from the back over the top of the needle to the front. And then because I have to do the knit stitch, it's going to the back again. If you hold the yarn in your right hand to knit, you are going to bring the yarn over from the back over the top like this and around it. So again, you've got that angle to the right. That's what you want your yarn over to look like. So you do the yarn over and then you work the stitch. You can either pull the yarn over first and then pull the other stitch over, or you can pull them over both at the same time. So you're going to pull both of these over that knit stitch. And so you have this kind of double-headed result here. You see the two strands here. Before I do a purl, I'm going to do a regular yarn over. So you can see that it's leaning to the left. So the yarn is in the front and then it goes over the top of the needle. And then I have to bring the yarn back to the front again in order to do the purl stitch. And once again, I will pull both of those stitches over. I can do it one at a time, like that, or I can do them both at the same time, whichever is easier for you. So now we've got another purl stitch. So once again, I'm going to do a regular yarn over, and then the yarn has to come to the front in order to purl it. So I'm going to purl it and then bring both of those over. So let me show you both the knits and the purls again with the yarn in the right hand. So I'm going to do a knit stitch. So I'm going to bring the yarn over the needle from the back and then back around to the back. Then I'm going to knit it. And then I'm going to bring both of those over. I can do them one at a time or both at the same time. Once again, a reverse yarn over, knit the stitch, bring them both over. And for a purl stitch, I'm going to bring the yarn to the front first and then over the needle and back to the front to do the purl. And then once again, I'm going to pull them over. So the yarn's already in the front, so I just bring it over the needle and then back to the front again to do the purl. All right, so why do we have to do the yarn overs in different directions? Let's take a close-up look. I've got a knit stitch here. If I did a regular yarn over at this time, so that the yarn is coming over the needle, is angling to the left. If I did a regular yarn over and knit that, when this yarn over gets passed over the other stitch, it twists at the base. And that's going to prevent the stretch from being as stretchy as it could be. I take that out. When I do a reverse yarn over, so I bring it over the needle and then to the back, then when I'm passing it over, the result is open. And then I pass this one over as well. So I'm just creating more yarn in this bind off edge than I would have if I had done a regular bind off. The reason we don't have to worry about the direction of the yarn over in the previous bind off method where we were working that extra stitch after we bound off a stitch is because with that method we were binding off over the yarn over. We weren't taking the yarn over the top of another stitch. So what's getting bound off is this stitch to the left over the top of the yarn over versus the yarn over getting passed over a stitch to its left. And that makes the difference in whether there's something twisted underneath the needle versus what's going on within the chain itself. So I'll finish up this edge and then we'll do our comparisons. So let's look at how well these bind offs actually work in terms of their ability to stretch. So I've got a ruler here. I want to stretch the fabric as much as I can so we can see how much the fabric can stretch. So I'm going to lay the edge down at the 0 and then stretch it as much as I can this way. So it gets to about 8.5 inches. So let's look at just the edge. We'll put the corner right here and we'll stretch it. So this can go to about 9 inches. And this one is Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. So again, let's look at the fabric first. And this one goes to about 8, just over, yeah, about 8, 8.25. And then let's look at the edge. The edge can go to about 9. So both of these, the edges stretch more than the fabric. So the question is, do you need an edge that can stretch more than the fabric? I think probably not. In some cases, it can be helpful if the edge will stretch as much as the fabric. So if you're knitting a sock and you need to get that sock past your heel, the fabric, the entire sock has to be able to get past your heel. And if the bind off edge doesn't get past your heel, then the sock's not going to get past your heel. But if the bind off edge is stretchier than the fabric and the fabric can get past your heel, you're not gaining anything by having more stretch. The other issue is that it can create kind of a flared effect. The ribbing helps with that. When it's in a relaxed state, the ribbing will help hide the fact that this edge is actually longer than the fabric. But if you're working with a flat fabric like garter stitch or stockinette, then when you use one of these really stretchy bind offs, you get an edge that is a lot longer than the rest of the fabric. So it can work with ribbed fabric and aesthetically can be okay. When it's relaxed, it might be kind of ruffled, but when you're wearing a sock, that edge isn't going to be relaxed. So the question is, do you like the way that this looks, or is it going to be in a place where it doesn't matter how it looks and you just want to go for the functionality? So it's not wrong to use this for something like a sock or even a hat if it's what you want, but you may not need that much stretch. For either one of these, one option could be to only make those extra stitches or only do the yarn over some of the time, just to give yourself a little bit more stretch, but maybe you don't need to do it every time. So let's look at how the stretchability compares to sewn bind offs. So I have videos on each of the 3 sewn bind offs that I've used here. This is the bind off that's called the sewn bind off. This one is the grafted bind off. It's used with Knit One Pro One ribbing. It's part of a tubular or Italian bind off when you do some initial setup rows before the actual sewing part. It works really well with Knit One Pro One ribbing specifically. And this one has what is called the half hitch bind off, otherwise known as stem stitch bind off, outline stitch bind off, a lot of things, but it mirrors the smooth side of the long tail cast on. These are 3 different sewn bind offs, but they all require cutting the yarn and running it through the live stitches. So let's look at this. So this is garter stitch. Let's look at how stretchy this fabric is. This fabric goes to about 8.5 inches, same as the ones that we saw before. Now let's look at this edge. So this edge is going actually just a little bit beyond the 8.5 inches to 9 inches. So this is very stretchy and it doesn't flare really at all. So that is the sewn bind off. Now let's look at the grafted bind off. Let's look at our ribbed fabric. Once again, it's coming out to about somewhere between 8 and 8.5 inches. And then let's look at the edge is also about 8 and 8.5 inches. So this one stretches as much as the fabric stretches. And this is the outline stitch bind off. Once again, the fabric is just over 8 inches, not quite 8.5. And the bind off is going as long as the fabric can go. So all three of these sewn bind-offs will stretch as much as the fabric, which typically is as much as you want, but the disadvantage is that if you need to take out the bind-off, like if you decide you don't like the result or you made a mistake, you have to take it out stitch by stitch. You can't just rip it out and unzip it like you can with other kinds. So the sewn bind-offs functionally will stretch as much as the fabric. Aesthetically, you have some nice choices based on your stitch patterns that you're working with, but the execution can be a problem because if you have a really long edge, you might have to join additional yarn as you go along. You have to pull that yarn tail through every stitch. And if you need to take the bind off out, you have to take it out stitch by stitch. So let's look at the standard bind off and its cousin, the suspended bind off. The suspended bind off just helps you keep some slack in your stitches as you're binding off so the result isn't as rigid. So if we look at this is a standard chain bind off, and I've got the same number of stitches, and I can stretch this fabric out as I can, but you can see that that bind off edge isn't stretching as much. It gets to the point where it's kind of rigid. So I can only get this one to go to 6 inches. So the fabric can still go, between 8 and 8.5 inches, but the edge can only get to 6. So this one is the suspended bind off. I did a video on this recently. I'll link to it above and down below. And this one provides more stretch in that standard bind off. So once again, I can stretch to about 8.5 inches. And this time, my bind-off edge is about 7. So the regular, it was 6. I get an extra inch with the 7. It doesn't go the full amount, but if you don't need it to be able to stretch to the full amount, this could be a good option. So there's no one size fits all in terms of the combination of stitch pattern that you want to use, the aesthetic result that you want, and the amount of stretch that you need. So a suspended bind off might work when you need a little bit more stretch. A sewn bind off will work if you want it to stretch as much as the fabric. And these stretchy bind-offs will work if you really need something that's stretchy, but you have the option of not doing it every single time. You could do it occasionally in order to provide more stretch. So what I would suggest is you experiment with some swatches and see how much extra stretch you can get by maybe doing it every 4 stitches or every 2 stitches instead of every other stitch. See what you think of the look of the edge in the particular stitch pattern you're going to be using, and then you can make your choice. And I always recommend that you swatch it out and try it first to get practice, but secondly, to see if your results are the same as what I get, because every knitter is different and you might end up getting something that's even stretchier or not as stretchy as what I got here. You can find links to the suspended bind-off and all of the sewn bind-offs down in the video description. And if you're interested in even more bind-off methods, I have this playlist over here. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below. Or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.